There is nothing inevitable about history. As such, there is nothing inevitable about capitalism. The commercialization theory represents common beliefs about capitalism, that it existed in utero as long as humans have traded one good for another, that it lied dormant beneath the fetters of feudalism waiting to be unleashed, and that it emerged in Europe after a critical mass of commercial activity. If this is true, then why didn't capitalism develop in any of the high civilizations of Asia, Africa, or the Americas? Another belief positions the city as the birthplace of capitalism. But as powerful urban commercial centers, why didn't capitalism first manifest in Florence or in the Dutch Republic? In Florence's case, the city acted as what author Ellen Meiksins Wood describes as a collective lordship, reminiscent of feudalism in its appropriation of rents, dues, and taxes from countryside peasants via extra economic means, political, juridical, and military coercion. The Dutch Republic introduced novel innovations in banking, stock trading, and speculation, and even imported grain from the Baltics to feed its large urban population. But Dutch merchants primarily made their fortunes by transporting luxury goods between fragmented markets, profit in circulation, and in the case of grain, by buying cheap and selling dear, rather than by improving labor productivity within a competitive domestic market. For the true origin of capitalism, we travel to England. The Norman conquest of the 11th century fashioned England's ruling class into a uniquely unified political and military entity. By the 1500s, the central state incorporated aristocratic, municipal, and corporate powers to eliminate the parcelized sovereignty that defined feudal Europe. This involved the establishment of a more unified law code, which stood in contrast to absolutist France's 360 local law codes. Not to mention England's well-developed internal road and water transport system that eventually positioned London as the heart of a new national market. Reflecting the local intellectual dialogue of the time, 16th century English landlord surveyors began to conceive of a more profitable relationship with the land, a market of leases, in which the value of a property was determined by its capacity for productivity, exchange value, rather than by law or custom. As a few English landlords owned an unusually large proportion of land, they applied this new economic model en masse. This obligated peasant producers on these formerly feudal properties, who elsewhere in Europe maintained direct access to their means of survival, the land, to become tenant farmers on economic leases, producing food to be sold competitively in a nationwide agrarian capitalist market. This marked a transformation of social property relations in England, in which landlords, who collected commercial profits from their tenants, strived to improve labor productivity to maintain competitiveness, while tenants also felt the pressure to improve land use techniques to maintain their leases and afford food. As Wood explains, capitalism was born when market imperatives seized hold of food production, the provision of life's most irreducible necessity. So is the market one of opportunity, or one we're forced into? Now, let's explore the idea of improvement. In his 17th century Second Treatise of Government, John Locke states that man gains a natural right to property once he mixes his labor with it, or once someone he's hired mixes their labor with it, transforming the land from its virgin state. The value of land and the right to private property, therefore, come from making the earth productive and profitable through labor and improvement, rather than through common possession. The word improve, in its original sense, means to do something for monetary profit, especially the cultivation of land. As smaller agricultural producers could not compete with larger landholdings, and as English law adopted ideals of improvement in land litigation, less competitive farmers faced dispossession, especially through the process of enclosure. This forced the propertyless to sell their labor power for wages, either as tenants or as factory workers for new industry, for mere access to the means of survival. This process unsurprisingly produced riots and the emergence of countryside vagabonds. Wait, you mean crime and social unrest are economic issues? Continued agricultural innovation created more food with less units of labor, enabling England to support a large population disengaged from agriculture. London's urban population swelled with the freshly dispossessed, creating, for the first time ever, a national market for cheap, everyday commodities. The limited spending power of the new city dwellers further motivated landholding capitalists to improve productivity, to keep prices low enough while still garnering a profit. We now see that mass proletarianization and industrialization were the result, not the cause of market society. By creating a dispossessed working class, commodifying their labor power, and rendering them fully market-dependent, capital not only created a growing labor force and a burgeoning national commodity market, but also new impetuses and capabilities for industrial development. The survival of capital and labor alike depended on the market, and thus the market itself became a tool for social stratification and control. Capitalism's need for infinite growth and accumulation propelled its reproduction all over the British Isles and the world. 16th century Tudor England looked west to Ireland as a laboratory for this new form of economic control. Rather than simply conquering it with military force and extracting rents through political and juridical pressures, England sought to reproduce its agrarian capitalism in Munster, inviting otherwise dispossessed English farmers to improve Irish land. This way, even if England didn't fully possess Ireland, it still retained it in its economic orbit through what could be called the world's first structural adjustment program. Some of the same dispossessed people who colonized Ireland went on to colonize the English North American colonies. They again deployed the concept of improvement to justify the dispossession of indigenous people across the Atlantic. It wasn't enough that they lived on the land or even cultivated it, because they surely did not improve the land to English standards. Usurping the land, making it more productive, and thus increasing its exchange value was seen as a betterment for all humanity. As England's capitalism developed, it exerted pressures on other states to solidify and industrialize, to keep up not only economically, but also militarily. In fact, capitalism aided in the formation of unambiguously sovereign nation-states that presided over fixed territories. As a self-reproducing economic system, capitalism separated the economic from the political, stabilizing and unifying once fluid feudal borders, and creating a strong national market. The transformation of politically constituted property into capitalist property allowed the state and the national market to split, and then work together for their self-preservation against the proletariat masses. Now you may think, in the era of globalization, what use do nation-states serve? Well, as author Ellen Meiksins Wood explains, as capitalism is disembodied from other social relations, it will have a distinctive need for politically organized provision just to keep people alive, allegedly, through times where they cannot sell their labor power, and to ensure a reserve army of workers. Nation-states thus maintain a certain local stability to allow a predictable arena for capitalist production and exchange. Furthermore, as nation-states compete with one another, uneven development ensures that some states and their low-cost labor forces remain subordinate to others, particularly with the threat of military coercion from the US and economic coercion from the IMF and the World Bank. Although, China's recent growth may actually refute this. So given the very specific circumstances from which capitalism spawned, why does it appear so inevitable? Perhaps this is due to its ahistorical link with the Enlightenment. Are we really supposed to believe that the rationalization of the state, of the economy, of culture through education, the decline of superstition, the belief in linear progress, the criticism of arbitrary power and authority, and the devotion to universal human emancipation blossom from the same seed as the fundamentally oppressive, exploitative, appropriative, and volatile capitalist system? Enlightenment thought mainly emanated from 17th century France, a pre-capitalist absolutist state in which peasants still dominated agricultural production and whose fragmented ruling class collected surplus value via extra economic means. Capitalism was not born amidst the rational geometric gardens of France, but rather in the irrational, wild English landscape gardens. The Enlightenment did not provide a transition to capitalism, but rather an alternative route out of feudalism. Nevertheless, the nonsensical marriage between modernity and capitalism obscures the novelty of capitalism's appearance. Capitalism doesn't seek the improvement of humanity, rather, the improvement of property. No wonder I'm so obsessed with optimizing my every moment. TLDR, capitalism is too abstract and anthropocentric a system to effectively mediate a holistic relationship with the earth. It clearly does more harm than good, alienating and destroying all living things with its impersonal machinations. It presents itself as divine law, but it's just another religion. A very young religion at that. With capitalism, it always goes back to the land, so in envisioning a more equitable future, I echo land back.